I pretended to be my boss's favorite company, so he flew to Europe for a job that didn't exist. Here's what happened. Subscribe to Am I the Jerk on YouTube and hit the bell for notifications. This was in the throes of the analog mid-90s. Fax machines, FedEx, dial-up computing, and voicemail were the most common business tools. I was a young regional sales manager for a major branded consumer product. I covered the grocery class of trade in 11 western states. My division worked out of Chicago, and I had a home office on the West Coast. I had made my reputation by typically making my quota and keeping costs within budget. I would get reassigned to struggling markets, and more often than not, I would usually make my sales number. Nothing too fancy. I just figured where the best opportunities were and concentrated on them. In those days, we had something called Market Development Funds, MDFs, or as we called it, making days fun in the time before such things were deemed illegal. It was money we could literally use for almost anything you could imagine. Wining and dining, sending buyers to the Super Bowl, taking them on market research trips. I once took 6 honchos for a weekend of fishing in Mexico. As long as you had the receipts and your boss knew, except in cases where they specifically asked not to know, we were free to spend money as we saw fit. This was old school Mad Men style slush funds, all tax deductible. Typically, the MDF money was 2% of your total annual gross sales, and was use it or lose it, meaning it had to be spent because it wouldn't roll over. I always had some left over. As a team player, I would let my boss, Sasquatch, know, so he could use it. No big deal. Towards the end of the year, my weekly FedEx pack from the company started including sign-offs for payments to a supplier I had never heard of. What was weird is they were for a demo company that wasn't one of my regional suppliers. If you've ever been offered a sample or a coupon for a grocery store, that's a demo company. I called the broker or agent in that market and learned that they had never used the company, or ever even heard of them. I finally figured out that they were from Sasquatch, and that he had thrown them in with my other sign-offs. I called him and asked if he knew what they were. He said they should be assigned to my MDF and not to worry about them. This was a little unusual, because demos would normally be taken out of other monies or come down from marketing. Whatever, I signed off on them. About 3 months later, I was called into HQ for a meeting, where I was told I was being transferred to a market that I had never worked before and would be required to relocate. At the time, my wife was pregnant, and we just started an expensive remodel on our newly purchased home. The company had some relocation benefits, but it was just too hectic to pull up roots and move to the southeast. I declined the offer and was told that I could look for another job within the company or receive a severance package. I wound up taking the severance. Several months later, one of my ex-coworkers told me that my region had been taken over by one of Sasquatch's past work associates, who he'd managed to get hired in my spot, and that the region was tanking. Badly. Nothing made sense. Why was I terminated and then replaced by someone who lived in another city and who couldn't do the job? I started to think in my naivety that I may have put a target on my back. After some research and digging, which was much harder before the internet, I learned that the demo company billing the MDF was based in my ex-boss's previous city, and was just a P.O. box, a telephone, and a DBA, registered by the new person in my job. I later found out it was his girlfriend or mistress. I was livid. Like most people, I tend to plan revenge in my head, but never really go through with it. Most of the time, it's just a coping mechanism, and not very useful in moving on past being wronged. But this was so egregious, so uncalled for, and so disruptive to my life that I felt I had to get even. My plan evolved to take this guy down. Whatever time it took, whatever the cost in lives or money, I was gonna get this dude. I may have been able to rat him out to the company, but they might have dismissed my complaint as coming from a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. I decided that I was going to approach the guy as a phony recruiter, not just a guy collecting resumes, but as a retained corporate headhunter, someone paid to onboard people for big jobs. I had spent a year early in my career working for a super exclusive headhunting firm, and knew exactly what transpired in the process. My subterfuge required international tele-exes, phony letterhead, faked English accents, and overseas friends to do my bidding. Sasquatch was obsessed with expensive watches and golf. He played regularly and watched pro golf both on TV and live. he would incessantly chatter on about both subjects. To bait him, I arranged for him to be approached for an executive position with a major Swiss watch company for a position tied to pro golf sponsorships, and included a shopping list of benefits and prerequisites. The job would require hobnobbing with major sports organizers, flying around the world, first class, and basically spending money. It was a job he could only dream of. In the slow and methodical long con, I strung him along until the time was right to close with an offer. The only catch was that he had to report to Switzerland for the final offer and onboarding. I deliberately scheduled it for a week of the old jobs division meetings and reportings. They were mandatory and impossible to miss without raising red flags. Sasquatch was worried that his absence would be impossible to cover, especially if he was out of the country. The headhunting firm said they could move the appointment up a few days so that he would be able to attend his meeting, but that he would need to purchase an unrestricted business class seat and make his own hotel reservations. Save your receipts and the watch company will reimburse you, he was told. Sasquatch showed up to his swanky hotel suite, which he'd paid for with his own card, and promptly received a note from the watch company that his appointment had to be rescheduled for the following Monday due to a major corporate crisis. Sasquatch called the phony recruiter in a panic about missing the corporate meetings back in the States. It was agreed that he would call in sick, and that whatever happened with the old job, he was headed to much greener fairways. Enjoy your weekend in Europe. By Monday, you'll be in your dream job. While Sasquatch was cooling his jets in Europe, I nonchalantly called his boss, the president of the division, and casually asked for a reference on Sasquatch's work ethic and dates of employment. You'd be surprised how often this mistake happens. The president, to his credit, didn't tip his hand or act very surprised by the call, but like a good corporate wonk, he referred me to human resources. I let it slip that he was in Europe finalizing his new job, and that he'd already given the company notice. My bad. Eventually, I was able to put together the aftermath from old coworkers and other people in the trade, who didn't know I was the revenge ninja. When Monday came and went, Sasquatch must have been apoplectic. This is to be assumed, since we had cut all communications to let him twist in the wind. We received at least 20 calls to the exchange and multiple faxes. Sasquatch hung around the hotel for a day or two, and then finally decided to leave for home. I assume at some point he may have contacted the watch company, but I never confirmed it. When he finally got home, he found his office had been packed up and left with his wife. An HR person met him off-site to give him his severance and retrieve the car and other company property. I heard his wife left him sometime later, and his mistress was fired for theft. I figure he spent at least $10K on travel in the hotel. I wish I could say I tipped my hand and told Sasquatch that I was the author of his demise, but it really served no purpose, and in theory may have exposed me to some retribution of my own. By my moral lodestar, I got even with a thief who was content to steal and take my livelihood. That was plenty. Our original poster went to some extensive planning for this revenge here. I don't know if this revenge was entirely justified to this extent, but I gotta give him credit for the plan. It's not exactly clear how many people are involved in this. It sounds like it's maybe only a couple, but they definitely pulled it off well. I do honestly feel kinda bad for the guy. It sounds like he lost everything. I don't know if he necessarily deserved this level of revenge, but hey, what do you guys think? You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below. And don't forget to subscribe. My employer tried to cut my hours down to part-time, so I started my own company. I must confess, I have profound respect for people who don't take crap from their employers. You're my heroes, and so I hope my story can help someone else. Okay, so first some necessary background info. I live in a small country and I'm an engineer in a very niche field. Where I live, there are about 15 to 18 people in my field in the whole country. Also, unions are a good thing here, and most companies are fine with unions. The employee benefits from this, but so does the employer since the rules of the game are very clear. Clear for most people, as my employer was about to find out. My story goes like this, and it took place late 2019 until late 2020. My team consisted of 3 people, me included, and one on our team, our mentor, was ready to retire 2 years prior to this happening. But he stayed on because, you know, codependence issues, I guess. We had 10 to 12 years experience each. We were just younger and more inexperienced than our mentor who had 40 years plus. I really really envisioned us taking over the team soonish. Company is a large actor where I live, but things had not been going too great for the shareholders for some 6 months prior to all of this happening. Knowing this, I decide I'll not ask for a raise in my annual performance review to show that I'm a team player, and explicitly state this to my boss, Mr. V. All is fine and well for 3 months. Then the bomb drops. One fine autumn day in 2019, I was called to a meeting with my boss, Mrs. G. Mrs. G told me that they didn't expect there to be enough work to go around for my team next year. COVID hadn't hit yet, so that wasn't the reason. They wanted to cut me down to a part-time job, working only 80%. That would be about 4 days a week. This was looking to start in about 3 months. I immediately asked if this is also the case for my other coworker, and if our mentor was going to retire. Well, yes, but no. My coworker would also be offered 80%. Our mentor was going to be working for 60%. And I'm like, what? He really wants to retire, you know? Mrs. G says he isn't yet because of reasons and stuff. Okay, so I signed the new contract but feel bad about it, since I was really trying to be a team player and didn't feel my employer was taking responsibility for us employees, but rather only thinking of the shareholders. I also get the feeling that they don't see me or my coworker taking over the team anytime soon. Despite us not being novices in the field, I immediately started planning for the future. After this happens, I start asking around if other employers are also facing part-time employment due to no projects in 2020. As one does, you want to know how others are doing, right? Nobody else is getting part-timed, and everybody's appalled. Apparently, it's just us three. We're singled out for some reason. Some of our colleagues even say that they've had stints of no work for months without any actions being taken in this regard. There's now general displeasure in my team towards our employer. Since our mentor just wanted to retire and let us do the job, there wouldn't have been any reason to have us younger engineers working part-time really. But no, because of reasons and stuff. Okay, so what to do? I have a family and 2 kids, mortgages and all that, and this would be a blow to the family income. So I start planning to do some work on the side. Since I'm an engineer, I can do consulting, right? My employment contract says no. But if my employer cannot or will not offer me a full-time job, the union contracts say that I can do what I want with the rest of my time, and my employer cannot interfere. I also have the right to refuse more work from my employer because I may have other obligations. Me, 1, employer, 0. I open up my own company, buy a domain, make a web page, start calling, writing, and letting people know I'm available for consulting. Of course, I checked with the union lawyers beforehand if this was okay, which it was. Totally fine. They told me that since my employer had laid me off and rehired me part-time, I could do what I want with the rest of my time. This wouldn't have been the case if I had requested part-time employment. Great. I go to work for myself then. Me too, employer 0. Almost immediately after our new contracts take effect, my employer starts noticing there's more than enough work to go around and asks me to work more hours. I say no. Unfortunately, I have other obligations. I didn't really. I was just making a stand and forcing them to recognize their own mistake. Time passes. My savings account drains in about 3 months' time, but we managed to cut down on our expenses. So it's not rough seas, but still not smooth sailing by far. Income is a bit on the low side, although I managed to get some consulting done in my own time. I switch from sourdough bread to stale, boring white bread. Go from good beer to Bud Light to no beer. You gotta do what you gotta do. No more fine roasted coffee from the small shop on the corner. Only what sludge I can get at the supermarket and brew at home. But this is temporary, I tell myself. And then it happened. I get a big job and start moonlighting to get it done, working evenings and weekends. And this is where crap hit the fan, because word got out. I get an angry phone call from Mrs. G's boss, Mr. V, and we have a heated conversation over what I can and cannot do. The conversation was something like this. Think of how this reflects on our company. That's not my concern here, Mr. V. I have bills to pay and mouths to feed. This is not what I had in mind. Hey, you laid me off, man. You should know the rules of the game. You cannot dictate what I do in my spare time. Perhaps you should have thought it through when you reduced my hours. You'd think I was happy to lose income and wouldn't try to remedy my financial situation?
You can work more hours for us then.
I have other obligations now. I can't let my customers down.
You should consider your next steps very carefully, young man.
Mr. V, I'll do that. Thank you for calling. What then followed was a phone call from me to my union explaining the situation. Later that week, my employer got a phone call from the union lawyers who spoke to Mr. V in the HR department, telling them what they can and cannot do. And I just kept working for myself. Mr. V is now very unhappy. He's stopped greeting me when we pass each other in the hallway. Me 3, employer 0. 2 months later, I hand in my resignation. 3 months after that, I'm gone. And to rub salt in the wound, something remarkable happens. My coworker, not our mentor, asks if I would want to partner up and start a new company together. I say yes, cause it was a great idea. My coworker handed in their resignation a month after I handed in mine, and we start working on our own company full time. People that depend on our services are very happy about us entering the market as independent consultants. Our business took off. Me/us 4, our employer 0. The aftermath, my former employer has had an opening for our job since August 2020. Our mentor told me last month he's finally put his foot down and is retiring at the end of the year, as he's turning 70 soon. They'll have thus gone from 3 people in a very niche field to 0 in less than 2 years because of bad managerial decisions. It did not come as a surprise to me that there were no others available in the market. Since it is a niche field, I know almost every person personally, so I could have told them that everybody seemed happy with their current employer. Being a manager must suck. Oh wait, that's me now. Unfortunately, companies try to pull stuff like this all the time. You're cheaper to them as a part-time employee, and they want to have that option available. It really has nothing to do with anything else. It really did all backfire on them, though. Not only did they not have you available when they needed you, but you were able to get that going enough where you didn't need them at all. Follow that up with your coworker leaving shortly after and you guys starting your own company, and they're pretty much screwed at that point. It really does suck when you're in a position that you don't have control over a situation like this. Like our poster said, their finances were starting to feel the burn here. Thankfully for them, everything worked out okay. But for others, this can be a slippery slope. And again, it's all just to save the company a few bucks, maybe. Entitled parent throws a temper tantrum when I refuse to switch seats on a flight. So I'm flying cross-country, 5-hour flight, and I have an aisle bulkhead seat. So basically I have the most legroom on the plane other than first class. I'm also 6'1", so the extra legroom, which I paid for, is nice. Next to me is a child in the middle and an adult man at the window. The confrontation took place during boarding.
Excuse me, sir, would you mind switching seats with me so I could sit next to my son?
Possibly. Where's your seat?
Towards the back of the plane.
I don't know. I paid for extra legroom. Is it an aisle seat?
No, it's a middle seat.
I'm sorry, but that's not even close to a fair trade. Why don't you see if someone in your row is willing to switch with your son?
Are you kidding me? What kind of jerk won't let a mother sit with her son?
What kind of person expects to trade a middle seat for an aisle seat with 3 times the legroom?
You truly are heartless. I can't believe you won't switch with me. You're a terrible human being.
At this point, I just turned away and took my seat. She proceeded to march down the aisle, complaining to anyone who would listen about the jerk in the first row. I then turned to the guy sitting at the window. The kid had headphones in the whole time and was paying no attention to what was happening. Wow, can you believe that lady? I can't actually. She's my wife. Sorry you had to deal with that. So it turned out the kid was sitting with a parent anyway. Especially when the person there is already one of their parents. No, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna switch seats with you. I'm also a tall person, and when you're cramped up in a tiny space like that for hours, it can actually start to get painful. Our original poster put down extra money for that seat. You can't expect them to just give it up because you want them to. Under normal circumstances, I would say, sure, I'd move and let you sit with your kid. But our poster had the out in having someone switch with their son. They'd be getting the better seat, and then the son would be sitting with her. A stranger's probably more likely to agree to that, but it turns out it wasn't even necessary, and I think this lady just didn't want to sit by herself. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.